Have you ever wondered if a single person, no matter how small, could truly make a difference? What if the purest form of justice didn't come from a courtroom packed with seasoned lawyers but from the heart of a child? The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the sterile, grey room of the Manchester Employment Tribunal. Then, a new sound cut through the tension. The soft, determined scuff of a child's shoes. A 9-year-old girl, dwarfed by a man's worn trench coat, strode purposefully towards the judge's bench. She placed a bright yellow binder on the floor beside her and, in a voice clear as a bell, announced, "Your Honor, I'm here to speak for my mum." The room held its breath. The impossible had just walked in, and for a moment, even the law itself didn't know how to respond. The echo of those small footsteps seemed to bounce off the very foundations of the building, a stark contrast to the shuffling papers and quiet murmurs of the legal professionals. It was a drizzly October morning, the kind where the grey Manchester sky feels like a heavy blanket. The fluorescent lights of Tribunal Room 4 flickered, illuminating the small, determined face of Lily. The trench coat she wore, her late father's, hung nearly to her ankles. In her hands, she clutched a binder covered in hand-drawn stars and planets. "Your Honor, with your permission, I am my mother's representative," she repeated, her gaze fixed on Judge Eleanor Vance, who had paused, her pen hovering over a document, her expression one of utter disbelief. The silence that followed was so profound you could almost hear the city's distant traffic sigh. The lawyers exchanged bewildered glances. The clerk's jaw was slacked. And in the public seating area, a 38-year-old woman named Sarah felt her world grind to a halt as she watched her daughter, her little Lily, approach the stand with the unshakable confidence of a lifelong barrister. It had all started 3 months ago. That's when Sarah had been abruptly dismissed from her job as a cleaner at St. Jude's General Hospital, a sprawling, respected institution in the heart of the city. The official reasons were vague, corporate jargon designed to obscure failure to meet performance standards, non-compliance with protocols. Empty words that masked a much darker truth. The hospital's facilities manager, a man named Alistair Finch, had perfected a cruel system of exploitation. He hired vulnerable workers, mostly single mothers or recent immigrants, on rolling 3-month contracts. During that time, he demanded impossible workloads, forced them to work unpaid overtime, and cut corners on safety. If anyone complained or showed signs of burning out, he simply didn't renew their contract. But Sarah had been different. After a year of silent compliance, she began to notice things she couldn't ignore. She started keeping a private journal, documenting the dangerously diluted cleaning chemicals, the falsified sanitation logs, the times staff were forced to work while ill, risking the spread of infection to vulnerable patients. When Sarah finally gathered the courage to raise her concerns, Mr. Finch had fired her the very next day. But Alistair Finch had underestimated her daughter. Lily was a watcher, a listener, one of those quiet children who absorbs conversations from the next room and remembers every single word. In the weeks that followed the dismissal, she watched her mother crumble. She heard the hushed, tearful phone calls, saw the sleepless nights, and watched the light in her mother's eyes dim a little more each day. The legal aid solicitor assigned to their case, a kind but overworked man, had been brutally honest. "It's your word against a major hospital," Sarah, he'd said grimly. "They have resources, teams of lawyers. We have very little." That was when Lily made a decision that would change everything. Over the next few weeks, she developed a plan so meticulous it would have impressed a seasoned legal strategist. First, she sought the wisdom of her next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retired librarian in his 70s. Mr. Henderson, she'd asked one afternoon, "What does wrongful dismissal mean?" "I want to help my mum." Delighted by the girl's curiosity, he began to explain the basic principles of justice, workers' rights, and legal proceedings. But Lily went further. She started her own investigation. Every day after school, she'd sit on a park bench opposite the hospital, observing the staff coming and going. When she recognized someone who had worked on her mother's floor, she would approach with a disarming innocence only a child possesses. "Excuse me, did you know my mum, Sarah? She used to clean the cardiac ward." That's how she met Grace, a kind nurse who had witnessed Mr. Finch berating Sarah in a corridor. She spoke to David, a porter who had seen Finch ordering staff to sign off on cleaning schedules for rooms that hadn't been touched. And she found Chloe, another cleaner, who tearfully admitted she'd been threatened with dismissal herself if she spoke up for Sarah. The night before the tribunal, Lily had told her mother, "Mummy, I'm coming with you tomorrow." "Oh, sweetheart, it's not a place for children. Besides, we both know we're going to lose." "We're not going to lose, Mum," Lily had said with quiet conviction. "I have proof." Sarah had looked at her daughter, a mix of love and weary sadness in her eyes. What proof could a 9-year-old possibly have? Now standing before Judge Vance, a woman in her 50s known for her sharp intellect but also for her deep-seated sense of fairness, Lily opened her star-doodled binder. Inside was a collection of neatly organized papers. There were drawings, notes in a child's careful cursive, and something that made the hospital's lawyer, a slick man named Marcus Thorne, sit bolt upright in his chair, photographs. "Your Honor," Lily continued, her voice unwavering. "My mum didn't do anything wrong. But the man from the hospital, he did lots of bad things to lots of people." The judge, after a moment of internal debate, made a decision. In her 25 years on the bench, she had learned that justice sometimes arrives in the most unexpected packages. "Proceed, young lady," she said, her eyes on the yellow binder. "Miss Moreno, you may continue." Lily took a deep breath and began to recount her investigation with a precision that left the entire room stunned. She stated names, dates, and specific incidents. She presented the drawings she'd made of the unsafe chemical storage closets, based on her mother's detailed descriptions. She read aloud the testimonies she had gathered from the other employees, written in her own childish script but with a content that was devastatingly precise. But the real explosion came when she pulled a small, battered envelope from her binder. "And I have this," she said, holding up an old MP3 player. "It's a recording of Mr. Finch talking to another man about how to trick the workers." The silence that followed was so thick it felt like it had a physical weight. Marcus Thorne, the hospital's lawyer, leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is utterly irregular. You cannot possibly allow a child to sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge commanded, her voice firm. "This child is exercising her right to be heard as a material witness. And from what I'm seeing, she has information highly relevant to this case." As the small device played the recording, a conversation between Finch and a supplier filled the room. They openly discussed strategies for keeping problematic staff quiet and saving money on essential supplies. Lily looked over at her mother. Sarah was crying, but for the first time in months, they were tears of hope. The judge called for a 2-hour recess to review the evidence Lily had presented. In that time, something extraordinary began to happen in the corridors of the tribunal building. The story had leaked. A law student waiting for his own hearing had recorded the 30-second clip of Lily introducing herself. He'd sent it to a WhatsApp group of his classmates. From there it jumped to their tutors, then to local journalists, and finally it exploded onto social media. By the time the hearing resumed, a small crowd had gathered in the hallway, local news crews, neighbors from Sarah's street, other parents, and even a few current and former employees of St. Jude's, inspired by the courage of a 9-year-old girl. When Judge Vance returned to the courtroom, her expression had hardened. "Miss Moreno," she announced with grave formality, "after reviewing the evidence presented by your representative, this tribunal orders the immediate reversal of your dismissal. Furthermore, it recommends a full-scale, independent investigation into the labor practices at St. Jude's General Hospital." A gasp of joy erupted from the public gallery, so spontaneous that the judge had to bang her gavel several times to restore order. But this was only the first victory. Outside the tribunal, Marcus Thorne was speaking frantically into his phone. Alistair Finch, back at the hospital, was already fielding calls from concerned board members. And on social media, the hashtag "the 9-year-old solicitor" was beginning to trend nationally. Lily, oblivious to the media storm she had just unleashed, held her mother's hand tightly as they walked out of the building. "We did it, Mummy." Sarah knelt down in front of her daughter, cupping her face in her hands. "You did it, my love. You were perfect." But she added, a newfound strength in her voice, "I think this is only the beginning." And she was right. What neither of them knew was that Lily's small investigation had uncovered something far bigger than a single case of wrongful dismissal. She had pulled at a single thread, and in doing so, had begun to unravel a vast and rotten tapestry of corruption that implicated not just St. Jude's Hospital, but an entire network of private healthcare providers operating under the same cynical, exploitative system. That night, as Manchester settled down to sleep, 3 things happened at once. Alistair Finch held an emergency meeting with the executives of other private clinics. A team of investigative journalists, inspired by Lily's story, began looking into similar cases. And in her small bedroom, a little girl wrote in her diary with her favorite sparkly pen, "Today I helped my mum. Tomorrow I will help more mums." Have you ever felt that one person, regardless of their age, could change the world? Tell us in the comments what city you are watching from, and give us a like if you believe we all deserve justice. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is just getting started. The first rays of morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Lily's small bedroom as the incessant ringing of the telephone woke her. It was 6:30 on a Saturday, and her mum was already up, her voice a hushed, frantic whisper from the kitchen. Yes, I understand. No, we haven't spoken to any reporters." "What do you mean it's in the papers?" Lily padded silently down the hallway to the kitchen, where she found her mother, hair disheveled, with a look of sheer panic on her face. Spread across the small table were 3 different newspapers, and her own face, leaving the tribunal building, was on the front page of every single one. The youngest solicitor in Britain, declared the Manchester Evening News. 9-year-old exposes hospital scandal, proclaimed the Guardian. But the one that shocked Sarah the most was the headline in the Times, "The Little Defender Who Put the System on Trial." "Mummy, what's wrong?" Lily asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Sarah hung up the phone and knelt in front of her daughter, taking her small hands in hers. "Sweetheart, it seems what you did yesterday was a very big deal. The whole city is talking about you." "Is that bad?" "No, my love. But it means things are going to happen that we didn't expect." As if on cue, the doorbell began to ring, insistently, over and over. Then came a knocking at the door, then voices from the street, calling Lily's name. Sarah crept to the window and what she saw stole her breath. There were at least 20 people on the pavement. Some had cameras, others held signs. A few even had flowers and teddy bears for Lily. "Mrs. Moreno. BBC News. Can we have a word? Lily, you're our hero. We want to see the little solicitor." Just then, Mr. Henderson appeared at the back door, panting after having scrambled over the low fence that separated their gardens. "Sarah, my dear, this is getting out of hand. You need to get out of here for a few hours." It was Mr. Henderson who guided them through the back garden to his car, helping them escape the media scrum that had blockaded the front of their small terraced house. As they drove through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, Sarah's phone rang non-stop. Lawyers offered their services pro bono. Television producers wanted to make a documentary. Politicians pledged their support. And a publisher was even interested in the memoirs of the most famous 9-year-old in Britain. But not all the calls were supportive. Mrs. Moreno, a deep, menacing voice had said late the previous night, "It would be wise for you and your daughter to keep a low profile. There are powerful people who are not happy with the trouble you've caused." Sarah hadn't told Lily about that call, but she hadn't slept a wink all night. Meanwhile, in a plush office in the city center, Alistair Finch was holding a crisis meeting with 5 other directors from a consortium of private clinics that held major contracts with the National Health Service. The polished mahogany table reflected the strained faces of men accustomed to controlling every situation, now faced with something utterly unprecedented. A 9-year-old girl had publicly exposed their methods. "The situation is contained for now," said Marcus Thorne, the lawyer who had represented the hospital. "But if this escalates, if more employees feel brave enough to speak out, then we ensure they don't," Finch interrupted coldly. "We have confidentiality agreements with most of them. And for those we don't, well, they'll always need jobs." "Alistair, are you suggesting intimidation? That could land us in even deeper legal trouble. Deeper trouble than having a child expose our business model on national television. Because that's exactly what will happen if we don't act now." What Finch didn't know was that at that very moment, less than 2 miles away, another meeting was taking place. In the small flat of Chloe, the cleaner who had been too afraid to speak up for Sarah, 6 former employees from different clinics across the city were gathered. Lily's courage had ignited something in them. "They made me lie, too," said Rosa, a former catering assistant. "They told me if I didn't sign a false statement about Sarah, they'd make sure I never got another reference in this city. They forced me to work with a fever during last year's flu outbreak," added David the porter. "When I asked for a day off to recover, they threatened to fire me. My children go to the local state school because I could never afford private care," whispered another cleaner. The irony is I keep a clinic spotless for rich patients, while the director lives like a king. Chloe, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. I have recordings. Every eye in the room turned to her. For 2 years, I've been recording conversations on my phone. At first, it was to protect myself in case they tried to blame me for something. But then I realized what was really going on. Her hand trembled as she held up her old smartphone. I have Finch admitting he deliberately hires single mothers because they're more desperate and less trouble. I have conversations about how to cheat on hygiene inspections. I even have a recording where they plan to fire long-term staff just before the 2-year mark to avoid giving them permanent contracts. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of years of humiliation and accumulated fear. Why didn't you say anything before? Rosa asked softly. And do what? Who would have believed me? But now after seeing that little girl have the courage we didn't, it was David who made the decision that would change everything. Let's back Sarah and Lily. Let's tell the whole truth. The next day, Sunday, the country's leading current affairs program aired a special 1-hour report titled The Girl Who Challenged the System. The viewership was record-breaking. Lily appeared on screen, in her best dress, sitting beside her mother on Mr. Henderson's comfortable sofa. The journalist, Diane Sterling, a veteran anchor known for her sensitive handling of social issues, conducted the interview with the care a child deserved. Lily, why did you decide to help your mum? Because she always tells me that when something is wrong, you have to try and fix it. And what they did to my mum was wrong. Weren't you scared speaking in front of the judge? Yes, Lily admitted. But I was more scared of my mum staying sad forever. The simplicity of her answers stood in stark contrast to the complexity of the case she had uncovered. But it was Sarah's words that truly moved the nation. My daughter taught me that justice has no age. That when you are in the right, it doesn't matter how small or insignificant you feel. The truth always finds a way to come out. The impact of the program was immediate. Social media exploded with messages of support. But then, testimonies from other employees of similar clinics began to pour in. By Monday morning, Sarah's solicitor had received 15 new official complaints. But the most significant response came from an unexpected place. Judge Eleanor Vance had watched the program from her home. Afterwards, her own teenage daughter had turned to her and said, "Mum, that little girl did more for justice in one day than many lawyers do in their entire careers." Those words echoed in the judge's mind all night. The next day, she took an action that stunned the entire legal system. She issued a formal recommendation to the Crown Prosecution Service to launch a criminal investigation, not just into St. Jude's, but into the entire network of private healthcare providers Finch was associated with. This case has brought to light potential systemic irregularities, she announced at an impromptu press conference. Justice cannot turn a deaf ear when the voice of truth speaks from the mouth of a child. The news reached Alistair Finch while he was having lunch at his exclusive private club, a place where the city's elite met to discuss business far from prying ears. His phone rang off the hook. Parents of private patients demanding explanations. Lawyers warning of potential class action lawsuits. Corporate partners expressing concern. But the call that worried him most was from Marcus Thorne. Alistair, you need to understand the gravity of this. We are no longer talking about a wrongful dismissal. We are talking about a criminal investigation that could expose a decade of impropriety. And all because you underestimated a 9-year-old girl. It was then that Finch made a desperate decision. He called an emergency meeting of his board and proposed a strategy that would mark the beginning of the most intense phase of the battle Lily and Sarah would have to face. "We are going to fight back," he announced with a cold smile. "If they want a media war, they will get one. And we have resources they can't even imagine." What Finch didn't know was that shining in his window, he could just be seen by two men in a car parked across the street who had been taking photographs of his house for the last 2 hours. He didn't know that Chloe had already handed her recordings over to the police. And he certainly didn't know that the 9-year-old solicitor was already planning her next move. That night, as Manchester slept, Lily wrote in her diary, "The bad man from the hospital is angry. Mum is worried. But Mr. Henderson says when you are right, you must not stop. Tomorrow I will help more mums who are sad like mine was." At the bottom of the page, with her red crayon, she drew a small heart and wrote, "Justice is stronger than fear." Monday dawned grey and bleak over Manchester, with thick clouds that seemed to promise a coming storm. Lily was awake before her mother, as had become her routine, and tiptoed to the kitchen to make them both toast. It was a small responsibility she had taken upon herself, ever since she'd seen Sarah crying one morning because she no longer knew how to properly care for her daughter. As she spread butter on the bread, she heard the distinct thud of the morning paper being pushed through the letterbox. She ran to get it, hoping to see more positive news about their case, but what she found made her stomach clench. "Mother uses child in vindictive labor dispute," screamed the headline of the city's most influential business paper. Beneath it was a grainy photograph of Sarah leaving a supermarket with a grim expression, accompanied by an article that painted her as a problem employee with a history of confrontations. But that wasn't the worst of it. On the next page was an interview with 3 former colleagues, who described Sarah as volatile, dishonest, and manipulative. Lily didn't recognize any of the names, but the accusations were devastating. Sarah Moreno was always trouble, one of the anonymous sources claimed. She constantly complained, created a bad atmosphere, and we saw her taking cleaning supplies home without permission on several occasions. When Sarah woke up and saw the papers, all the color drained from her face. "Lily, sweetheart, I need you to understand something very important. People are going to say ugly things about us. That doesn't make them true." "Why are they lying, Mummy?" "Because when you tell the truth about powerful people, sometimes they get very angry and try to make you look bad instead." The phone started to ring. This time, it wasn't reporters wanting positive interviews. It was people shouting, hurling insults, accusing Sarah of using her daughter to make money, and threatening to teach her a lesson. Alistair Finch's strategy was working. Over the weekend, he had hired one of London's most ruthless public relations firms, specialists in reputation crisis management. Their plan was simple but brutally effective: discredit Sarah as a mother and an employee, frame Lily as a manipulated pawn, and divert media attention away from the real issue of corporate malpractice. On the legal front, Marcus Thorne had orchestrated the campaign with military precision. 3 former employees of the hospital, all of whom had been fired for various reasons years ago but were now in need of money, had been contacted and persuaded to give negative statements about Sarah in exchange for a consulting fee. A private investigator had been hired to dig into the Moreno family's financial history, looking for any discrepancy that could be spun into a scandal. But the masterstroke had been to feed this carefully constructed narrative to sympathetic, conservative media outlets. Sarah Moreno is an irresponsible mother who has coached her daughter to play a role in a scheme designed to get an easy payout, Thorne had explained to an allied journalist. It's a touching story, but when you look closely, do you really think a 9-year-old could gather all that evidence on her own? She is clearly being manipulated. By Tuesday, the narrative in much of the media had completely flipped. Talk radio hosts debated the ethics of using children for financial gain. Columnists wrote scathing articles about parents who sacrifice their children's innocence for money. Even child psychology experts appeared on television, warning of the potential psychological trauma that such media exposure could inflict on Lily. The pressure was immense. But it was when the first serious threat arrived that Sarah understood the true scale of what they were facing. On Wednesday morning, while walking Lily to school, 2 men blocked their path on the street. "Mrs. Moreno," said one of them, a stout man in a cheap suit. "My client would like a word." "What client? Who are you?" "Let's just say we represent interests that would benefit if you decided to withdraw your complaint and keep your daughter out of the media." "I don't know what you are talking about. Please let us pass." The second man, taller and with an unpleasant smile, moved to block her way. "My employer is a generous man, Mrs. Moreno. He's prepared to offer you significant compensation for this situation to disappear quietly. And if I don't accept, well, it would be a shame if something were to happen to your pretty little girl. Accidents happen, you know. Especially when parents aren't careful enough." Lily, who had stood silently clutching her mother's hand, looked up at the man who was threatening them. "My mummy isn't bad," she said, her voice firm. "And you are the men who were watching our house. I saw you from my window." The sheer precision of the little girl's observation momentarily startled the men. The taller one bent down to her level. "You are a clever one, little girl. Too clever for your own good." It was at that exact moment that Mr. Henderson appeared, walking towards them with a bag of groceries. "Sarah? Is everything all right here? Who are these gentlemen?" The men exchanged a look, assessing the situation. The presence of a witness was not in their script. "Nothing, sir," the stout man said with a sneer. "Just a friendly chat with Mrs. Moreno." "Well, it looks like your chat is over," Mr. Henderson replied with a surprising steel in his voice, positioning himself between the men and the family. "So I suggest you be on your way." After the men had gone, Sarah was visibly shaking. "Mr. Henderson, this is becoming dangerous. I can't put Lily at risk." "Sarah, my dear," he said gently, "do you think these men have appeared because your case isn't important? On the contrary. They've appeared because your case is so important that someone is willing to pay a lot of money to silence you." That afternoon, Mr. Henderson did something that would completely alter the course of events. He called his nephew, Ben Carter, an investigative blogger who worked for a respected online news outlet based in London. "Ben, I need you to come to Manchester. Immediately. I have a story for you that I think you'll find compelling. Ben Carter was 35, with a solid reputation for deep dive investigations and a particular disdain for abuses of power. When his uncle told him over the phone about the threats against Sarah and Lily, he was on the next train from Houston. Auntie Sarah's not my real aunt, but you get the picture. Uncle, this goes far beyond a simple labor dispute, he said, after hearing the full story. This is a systemic, corrupt network. And someone is scared enough to resort to physical threats. Ben spent the next 2 days investigating discreetly. He used his contacts in the legal system, spoke with current and former employees of several other private clinics, and started to draw connections that not even Sarah had imagined. What he uncovered was staggering. Alistair Finch wasn't just the director of one corrupt hospital. He was the central figure in a web that connected 6 private healthcare facilities across the Northwest, all operating under the same model of labor exploitation. More importantly, these facilities had multi-million-pound contracts with the NHS for specialized service contracts that were renewed year after year without a transparent bidding process. Sarah Ben told her on Friday afternoon, showing her documents he had obtained through a Freedom of Information request. Your case isn't about wrongful dismissal anymore. It's about fraud against the state, public administration corruption, and an influence peddling network that involves local officials. What does that mean for us? It means Lily didn't just expose the injustice done to you. She stumbled upon a system that has been stealing public money for years while exploiting workers just like you. That revelation came just as Alistair Finch was preparing his final blow against the Moreno family. On Saturday morning, an anonymous complaint was filed with social services, alleging that Sarah was an unfit mother who was recklessly exposing her young daughter to dangerous situations for personal gain. The complaint included photos of Lily entering the tribunal, clippings of the negative press, and a statement from a concerned neighbor claiming the girl was showing signs of psychological manipulation. The procedure was automatic. A social worker appeared at Sarah's door on Sunday morning with an order to assess Lily's living conditions and determine if protective measures were necessary. Mrs. Moreno, I'm here because we've received a concerning report about your daughter's welfare. Sarah felt the world collapsing beneath her feet. What report? Who? I'm afraid I can't disclose the source, but I do need to ask you some questions and see your home. Lily, who had been playing in her room, appeared in the doorway. Who's that lady, Mummy? Hello, Lily. I'm Carmen. I work to help children, and I've come to have a chat with you. For the next hour, the social worker asked questions that felt like knife twists to Sarah. Had Lily been missing school? Was she showing signs of stress? Had Sarah pressured her to lie about the hospital? But it was Lily who, with her characteristic honesty, provided the answers that gradually reassured the official. My mummy never told me what to say. I did my own investigation because I saw her crying every night. And I'm not sad that I went to the tribunal. I'm proud. I helped my mum and other mums too. Do you feel pressured by your mother to do things you don't want to do? No. My mum always says if I don't want to do something, I don't have to. But I wanted to help. By the end of the assessment, the social worker's view was vastly different from the one she'd arrived with. Mrs. Moreno, I see no evidence of neglect or manipulation here. Your daughter appears to be a bright, confident, and clearly very loved little girl. However, I must warn you that these sorts of complaints can be repeated. I recommend you keep a record of everything. After the social worker left, Sarah sunk onto the sofa, feeling utterly overwhelmed. Mummy, why did that lady ask if you made me do things? Lily asked, curling up beside her. Because there are people who want to break us apart, my love. They want us to stop fighting. Are you going to let them? Sarah looked at her daughter, this small, 9-year-old warrior who had shown more courage than any adult she knew. No, my love. They're not going to win. But even as she said the words, Sarah knew they were entering the most dangerous phase of their battle. Alistair Finch had shown he was willing to use any tactic, no matter how low. And she was just one woman with a young daughter, facing a system designed to protect the powerful. What Sarah didn't know was that while she was fighting her own despair, allied forces were mobilizing. Ben Carter had published his initial investigation online under the headline "The Hidden Network Behind the 9-Year-Old Solicitor." The article detailed the connections between the clinics, the suspicious public contracts, and the pattern of exploitation. The National Crime Agency had opened a formal inquiry based on his report. And perhaps most importantly, employees from all 6 clinics in the network, inspired by Sarah and Lily's bravery, had begun contacting employment lawyers. But the most significant development was happening on the streets of Manchester. A mother named Rosa, whose own son had received substandard care at one of the clinics, organized a meeting in her home on Sunday evening. She invited other parents who would had similar negative experiences. 20 women showed up, each with their own story of mistreated staff, overpriced services, and a healthcare system that seemed more designed to enrich its managers than to heal its patients. That little girl did what none of us dared to do, Rosa said. She stood up to the system. Now it's our turn to stand with her. By the end of the meeting, they had decided to form the Parents for Accountability in Healthcare Association with the aim of investigating and denouncing irregularities in private healthcare facilities. Meanwhile, in his office, Alistair Finch was receiving increasingly worrying news. 3 major corporate clients had pulled their contracts. 2 senior nurses had resigned, citing irreconcilable differences with management. And most alarmingly, he had received a summons to be questioned by the National Crime Agency. Marcus, this is spinning out of control, he said to his lawyer over the phone. We need a final solution, Alistair. We've tried media discredit, indirect threats, complaints to social services. Nothing is working. That family is more resilient than we calculated. Then we need to be more creative. On Tuesday night, as Lily was doing her homework at the kitchen table, a rock shattered her bedroom window. Attached to it was a handwritten note. Final warning. Drop the case, or the consequences will be permanent. Sarah found the note as she was sweeping up the broken glass, and for the first time since it all began, she seriously considered giving up. But then she looked at Lily, still focused on her maths as if nothing had happened, and she remembered her daughter's words on that first day in the tribunal. Your Honor, I'm here to speak for my mum. If a 9-year-old could find the courage to face down a corrupt system, how could she, her mother, possibly surrender? That night, Sarah made a decision that would define not only their future, but the futures of countless other working families. She called Ben Carter, the blogger. I want to tell the whole story. The corrupt contracts, the threats, everything. But on one condition. What's that? I want Lily there with me in the interview. I want the world to see she isn't a manipulated child. She's a brave girl who chose to fight for what's right. Sarah, are you sure? After this, there's no turning back. There hasn't been a way back since the day my daughter decided to be braver than every adult in this city. Have you ever had to choose between your safety and doing the right thing? Let us know in the comments what you would do in Sarah's position. And don't forget to hit like if you agree that courage has no age. This story is reaching its most intense moment. The interview was scheduled for Thursday at 5 p.m. at the National News Network's London studio. Ben Carter had coordinated everything meticulously. It would be broadcast live on the country's most watched evening news program and simultaneously streamed to international media outlets that had shown interest in the story. On Thursday morning, Sarah woke with a strange feeling in her stomach. It wasn't exactly fear, but a certainty that this day would change everything forever. Lily, on the other hand, seemed completely serene as she ate her cereal and mentally rehearsed the things she wanted to say. Mummy, do you think Mr. Finch will be watching the interview? I'm sure he will be, sweetheart. Good. I want him to know I'm not scared of him. At 3 o'clock, Ben arrived to accompany them to the train station. He had fresh news he'd obtained that morning. Sarah, there's something you need to know before we go on. The NCA's investigation has discovered that the contracts between Finch's company and the NHS total more than £20 million over the last 5 years. And they have evidence that at least 5 million of that was diverted into private offshore accounts. What does that mean? It means Lily didn't just uncover labor exploitation. She uncovered a criminal enterprise that has been stealing millions in public funds earmarked for our healthcare. At the television studio, Diane Sterling, the journalist who would conduct the interview, met with Sarah and Lily beforehand. Lily, you understand that a lot of people will be watching this, don't you? Yes, Miss Sterling. I hope other sad mums see it and know that it's possible to win against the bad people. You are not nervous? A little bit. But my mum says being brave doesn't mean you are not scared. It means doing what's right, even when you are scared. At 5 o'clock sharp, the studio lights came on, and the live broadcast began. Good evening. I'm Diane Sterling. Tonight, we have with us Sarah and Lily Moreno, the mother and daughter at the heart of a story that has captivated not only a city, but the entire nation. 9-year-old Lily became the youngest solicitor in Britain when she defended her mother in a wrongful dismissal case. But what began as a labor dispute has since uncovered a suspected web of corruption reaching into the highest levels of private healthcare provision. Diane turned first to Sarah. Sarah, it's been a tumultuous few weeks since Lily stood up in that tribunal. What has this time been like for you? It's been intense, Sarah replied with raw honesty. I thought the worst part was being unfairly fired. But what came next? The threats, the attempts to take my daughter away, the campaign to make me look like a bad mother, that's been harder than losing any job. Lily, Diane said, her tone softening, do you understand why some people have said unkind things about you and your mum? Lily thought for a moment before answering with that seriousness that so defined her. I think so. When kids at school do something bad and you catch them, sometimes they get angry at you instead of admitting they were wrong. I think the bad grown-ups are just like the bad kids, but with more money. The simplicity of the answer brought an involuntary smile to Diane's face. Sarah, we've received documents suggesting your dismissal was just the tip of the iceberg. Can you tell us what else you've discovered? Sarah took a deep breath. Diane, when Lily started her investigation, I just thought she was trying to clear my name and get my job back. But what we've found is a network of private clinics that aren't just exploiting their staff, they've been stealing millions of pounds of public money meant for patient care. Can you be more specific? The contracts these clinics have with the NHS are artificially inflated. They charge for services they don't provide, for staff that don't exist, for materials they never buy. And all the while, they are forcing workers like me to operate in unsafe conditions for poverty wages. Diane then turned to Lily. Lily, when you decided to help your mum, did you have any idea you were about to uncover something so big? No, Miss Sterling. I just wanted my mum to stop crying at night. But when I started talking to other people, I realized that lots of mums were crying because of the same things. And that wasn't right. What have you learned from this whole experience? Lily was thoughtful for a moment, then replied with a maturity that impressed everyone in the studio. I've learned that grown-ups are sometimes scared to tell the truth because they think they're too small to change things. But I'm really small, and I managed to change something. So I don't think being small is a good excuse. At that exact moment, Diane received a note from her producer. Her expression shifted subtly. Sarah, Lily, we have just received breaking news. We are being told that Alistair Finch, the facilities manager at St. Jude's, was arrested by the National Crime Agency this afternoon in connection with allegations of fraud, corruption, and corporate malfeasance. The silence in the studio was absolute for several seconds. Sarah took Lily's hand. The little girl maintained her composure with astonishing serenity. How do you feel hearing this news? Diane asked gently. Relieved, Sarah answered, her voice thick with emotion. But also sad. Sad for all the families who were harmed for years while this system operated in silence. And you, Lily? I feel good because now maybe other mums won't have to cry like mine did. But I also hope that Mr. Finch learns how to be a better person. The interview continued for another 40 minutes, during which Sarah provided specific details of the irregularities she'd witnessed, and Lily proved time and again that, far from being a manipulated child, she was a small person with a remarkable understanding of justice and morality. But the most emotional moment came when Diane asked them about the future. Sarah, what will you do now? We'll keep going. I'll get my job back because the tribunal ordered my reinstatement. But more importantly, we are going to make sure this never happens to another family. We are going to work with the authorities to create a transparent oversight system for private companies that take public money. And we are going to help other workers who have been victims of this kind of abuse. And you, Lily? What do you want to be when you grow up? Lily smiled for the first time during the entire interview. I used to want to be a vet. But now I think I want to be a hospital manager. But a good one. One who treats the staff nicely and uses the money to help the children get better, not to buy expensive things. As the interview was being broadcast live, multiple things were happening simultaneously across the country. In a central London police station, Alistair Finch was giving a statement. His initial arrogance had given way to a nervous cooperation as he realized the mountain of evidence against him, Chloe's recordings, Ben Carter's documents, and the testimonies of more than 20 former employees. In the offices of the Crown Prosecution Service, formal charges were being prepared not only against Finch, but against 5 other directors and 3 public officials who had facilitated the fraudulent contracts. And in the homes of dozens of working families, women just like Sarah watched the interview with tears in their eyes, feeling, for the first time in years, validated and hopeful. But perhaps the most significant reaction occurred in the halls of Parliament. The Secretary of State for Health called an emergency meeting for that very evening, where the decision was made to immediately implement a new, transparent oversight system for all private contractors working with the NHS. When the interview ended, Sarah and Lily were met in the studio by a group of journalists, lawyers, and social advocates offering their support. But it was an older, elegantly dressed woman who surprised them most. Mrs. Moreno, I'm Patricia Carmichael, President of the National Association of Women in Business. We would like to offer you a job as the coordinator of our new support program for female workers who are victims of labor abuse. Your experience, your courage, and your first-hand knowledge make you the ideal person to help other women in similar situations. The salary would be triple what you were earning, and you would have full autonomy to develop the program. Sarah looked at Lily, who nodded enthusiastically. That means you'll get to help lots more mums, mummy. Yes, sweetheart. We'll get to help lots more mums. That night back in Manchester, Mr. Henderson prepared a special dinner to celebrate at his house. Sarah, Lily, Ben, and a few of the neighbors who had supported them gathered around the table. I'd like to make a toast, said Mr. Henderson, raising his glass. To Lily, who taught us that courage has no age. To Sarah, who showed us that a mother's love can move mountains for justice. And to all of us who have learned that when we stand together, we can change the world. As everyone celebrated, Lily went over to her mother. Mummy, are you going to stop crying at night now? No, my love. I'm not going to cry at night anymore. Good. Because I have a new idea to help even more people. Sarah smiled, a mixture of pride and a little trepidation about what her little revolutionary might be planning now. What's that, my love? I want to write a children's book. About how to be brave when grown-ups do bad things. So other children know that they can help, too. In that moment, Sarah fully understood that her daughter wasn't just the youngest solicitor in Britain. She was also the youngest teacher, who had just schooled an entire country on courage, justice, and the importance of never, ever backing down from a righteous fight. The case that began with one woman's unjust dismissal had ended by exposing a multi-million-pound corruption network, leading to the imprisonment of powerful white-collar criminals and creating a new system of transparency that would benefit thousands of families. All because a 9-year-old girl refused to accept that her mother should cry at night.